Итак, дорогие друзья, у нас сейчас в эфире будет Joel Spolsky. Я сейчас потихонечку переключусь на английский, представлю наших замечательных интервьюеров, и потом мы пойдем в эфир. Okay, so now we have a broadcast with Joel Spolsky. And first, let me introduce our interviewers. Олег Чарухин, lead journalist at Jokro Group. Андрей Бреслав, Kotlin lead language designer at JetBrains. And Oleg Shilaev, developer advocate for GraalVM at Oracle. And tonight, in J Point, broadcast one, special guest, co-founder of Fog Greek software, inventor of FogBugz bug tracker, Trello, Glitch, co-founder of Stack Overflow. Special guest, Mr. Joel Spolsky. Hey, Joel. How is it
Hello,
going?
everyone. Very well. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you. And Oleg, let's start.
Yeah, actually, I want to tell you a little story. Such stories are usually pretty tedious, but still, listen. About 15 years ago, I was somewhat a lost person. I was prepared to be a graphic designer, but it never worked. I found the only job I could to be a system administrator. I had a small network of Windows machines that I gradually transformed to GNU Linux, etc. And I had a lot of time to read. And then I found your articles, started reading, started learning how to code, how to think, and eventually became a software engineer and Java architect in that. So I'm here because of you and because of your texts. And somewhere in the beginning, I translated a bunch of your articles into Russian. It was Wife Journal, a really ancient social network. And here we met with Alexey Fedorov. He read these translations and made a couple of contributions. And as you know, he's founder and general producer of these conferences, all of these conferences. So what do you think, Alexey? Did that books influenced you or maybe the business somehow?
Absolutely. I have one word for you. Absolutely. That's the most exact words I've ever know for this. Yeah.
So actually, anything you see around, all these conferences, all these thousands of people, one way or another, it's because of you and your books. And I'm really proud to say this in person. Thank you very much. You really changed my life and our lives.
Wow, thank you. Well, that's a real honor to hear that.
Yeah. So
Nice.
I want to ask a first question, and that I hope my friends will pick up this talk. You had many titles: a blogger, writer, an entrepreneur, chairman. It's our definitions that are based on evidence, on projects you created. But how do you define yourself? Who are you?
Boy, that depends on who I'm talking to and what I'm doing at that particular minute, I suppose. I like to introduce myself as a programmer. And even though when I was running Stack Overflow, I went for quite a few years without having to program. But lately, I have started doing that again. So, I wake up in the morning and I take a bike, come back, and I sit down and write some codes. And really, there's different levels that you can work at in programming. I have a lot of fun when I'm working at the lowest level of just getting, one more line of code to work, just get the ability to upload a picture to Amazon S3 or something like that. And then I feel a lot of sense of accomplishment. But at other times in my career, I've worked at a much higher level where, maybe I had a vague idea like Stack Overflow for how a website might work. And I got other people to do the heavy lifting and write all the code based on that vision. So ultimately, it's just a question of changing the world a little bit or a lot through code and through creating code that runs on software that connects everybody.
So what do you do right now? I saw on your Twitter something called hash.ai that is intended for multi-agent simulations. Could you explain what is it?
Yeah, so what I do is really not responsible. I'm the chairman of 3 different companies, but each of those companies has its own CEO that actually runs the company. So Stack Overflow, Glitch, many of you know. Hash is the newest one, and Hash is it's a tool that you would use to create a model of the world when you don't really know how the inputs affect the outputs, but you do know how every agent in the system behaves. So I don't really know if adding more buses to a city bus line is going to just increase traffic, or if it will make everybody get where they're going faster. But we can simulate the behavior, and we know what a bus does. And so the idea of agent-based modeling is if you can just write a little bit of JavaScript to define how every agent in a system is going to behave, then Hash can run those agents for you and create a large simulation and show you, what the outcome would be based on those agents' behavior. So it's a different way of attacking modeling problems where you're trying to do what-if analysis, and you really don't have a clear grasp. It's almost a sort of a scientific tool you might use. It's famously used an awful lot in epidemics and epidemiology, I can't say that word, but in studying epidemics and studying the spread of disease. So you might know, what the chances of spreading disease are with a face mask or without a face mask, and children can spread it at this rate and adults at a different rate, and how long you have to be in a room with somebody before they catch it. You could kind of model all that stuff and see what the results will be of different policies. And that's the hope for Ash.
I have sort of a follow-up question to this. So your other projects are much more, I don't know the right word, but they seem like more down to earth in the sense that any developer understands why you need this or that. And well, Stack Overflow was a breakthrough, of course, but still, like, a concept could be easily described. So this seems to be your most far-fetched or most innovative project. Is it really?
Yeah, maybe. I've had, it's not, the idea wasn't mine, it's David Wilkinson, who's the CEO there. And I just help out as much as I can. But I think I've had more far-fetched ideas, some of which didn't work. So we'll see.
Yeah, so
I think,
oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, we probably, over the course of a decade or 20 years at Fog Creek, we probably tried 12 or 13 different products. And the ones that were majorly successful are Trello and Stack Overflow and then FogBugz. And then there were a lot that you've never heard of that didn't really go anywhere. That, we tried it and maybe we didn't ship it, or maybe it was just a bad idea. Or maybe it was a good idea and we did it badly. So you kind of have to keep trying a bunch of things in a bunch of different domains. And, for me, I really like Hash because I think it's got a great entrepreneur working on it, and a person that works on that all day, I think, is incredibly smart. And I think there's really something useful there. It may not be for all programmers. I think it's probably likely to be used by non-professional programmers mostly. It's not just another tool that a Java programmer would add to their library or that you would npm install. It's more something that a scientist who needs to use computers but doesn't want to learn how to become a full-fledged programmer could just sort of dip their toes.
So what's the ratio of there is a lot of money potential in it versus it changing the world for you, if it's a valid question at all?
Yeah, I think I don't really care about the money potential too much anymore. It's really just about solving problems that I feel frustration that there is no solution to them. And that was the case with Stack Overflow. So those of you who are slightly older programmers remember the time when you would Google a question and Experts Exchange would come up and you'd go to the page and it would say, please pay. And that was very frustrating. And I didn't understand why this was happening because I thought that the Experts Exchange was just an online forum. Anybody could run that server. and I was surprised that no other programmers stepped up and built an alternative. And after about a year of this, I said, that is enough is enough. We really got to do something here. This is not it's such an easy problem to solve if one person would just take the initiative and solve it instead of just complaining all the time. And so that was the feeling with Stack Overflow. And similarly with Trello, where I just couldn't find a way to organize teams at a high level. And it's really the frustration of like, there's a problem out there that there's such an easy solution. I don't understand why nobody does this. And after about a year of looking around and still nobody has done it, that's when I finally just become too frustrated and have to jump in.
Yeah, this makes perfect sense. But what about those other ideas that didn't fly? Were they motivated similarly? Like, was this also some obvious thing that nobody did?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that some of them would have worked if we had done them well. I'm trying to think of some ideas that didn't fly. One of them, we had this idea of a backup appliance, and the idea was it would be a piece of hardware that you bought, which is really just a server running some smart code, and with a lot of hard disk, and you would put it on your network, and it would go around your network and find all of your workstations on your network and back them up in kind of an automated, fast and efficient way. And the software that was out there that did it was really awful, and this seemed like a good idea at the time. And I think we eventually gave up on it and never got very far with it. And I don't think there's a lot of market for software right now. There still is, maybe in data centers. And I think that's because most of the world just said this is too hard, and they moved to the cloud. They essentially said, unless you're Amazon or Google, I never want to hear about backup again. I just want the stuff to be in the cloud, and it can never fail. And similarly, because users moved so much of the information off of their computer onto the cloud, I think most people are in a situation now where if they lost their primary computer or their primary laptop, they just buy a new one. They'd log on to, whatever it is, Google Drive, Dropbox, and then be up and running in half an hour. So the idea of backing up every single computer is not really an issue. I mean, some of those things, it really feels like a pain point, and then you realize that it's not, or that you're not going to be able to solve it.
Yeah, thank you. I think other guys may want to ask something too.
Okay. One of the most interesting things was so-called Joel test. For anybody who still don't know, it is a checklist for measuring quality of software of a team with questions like, do you have source control, daily builds, etc. So what changed through all these years? Maybe clouds that you mentioned just before, and any new modern technologies?
That's a good question. It was, I got this question. I mean, I wrote that article probably 20 years ago. And I said, the question it's asking, for those of you who haven't read it, is I'm applying for a job and I don't want to start working in a place that's going to be insane and drive me crazy. So how do I quickly assess as a job applicant if the place where I'm looking for a job is kind of one of the good guys or the bad guys? Like, are these do they know how to build software sort of in a professional way, or are they just a bunch of students or just winging it? And the checklist was pretty good at being simple yes/no questions. Do you have source control? Do you not have source control? We don't have to talk about why you have source control or how good it is. I just want to know if you have it. Because at the time, and this is no longer, everybody has source control now, I think, which is good news. But at the time, half the companies you went to would just say, no, we just we have a shared drive and we copy over the LAN, and then if anybody wants to make changes, they're or there's only 2 people, or so we didn't think we needed it. Do you keep track of bugs? No, I kind of remember what I need to fix, and then we just ship it, and then the customers tell us. There were a lot of really casual people in the days before this. Some of that stuff has changed, and there's a lot of stuff now that's not on the Joel test, which you almost universally see at good companies. So, for example, I used to talk about, can you make a build in one step? Is there a single button you push that compiles all the code and is ready to ship to customers? And nowadays, it's very rare not to see people using some form of continuous integration and maybe even continuous testing. So you'd be very suspicious if you went to apply for a company and they didn't believe in continuous integration in some format. So I think everybody's expectation of the levels has gone up, but I think there's still a lot of truth that there are a lot of companies out there that are using essentially there's a kind of a difference between the professionalism of doing things right and what you would expect a student that just came out of university to be doing.
Okay. The other thing you did is the guerrilla guide to interviewing, right? Half of the known universe still use it as an icon of how to do interviewing. And you're guilty of that. But I see that, yeah. Do you feel you are guilty that everyone take it as an icon?
Part of it is a really important point that I still stand behind, which is that there used to be, and there still are, a lot of companies that hire programmers with no attempts to assess if they're going to be good programmers. Let's just start with that. Like the part of the reason is that the traditional way that a non-programming organization hires people often does not involve any attempt to determine if they know how to do their job. There are a lot of jobs that you get by knowing the owner of the business, or by looking good in a suit, or by coming in and doing a good interview and going to the same school and asking the interviewer about their golf game or their children because you saw a picture of their children on their desk and then he likes you and then you get hired. And that's sort of the guerrilla guide for interviewing, is an attempt to say you can't do that for programmers. Programmers, this is a specific skill. Some people have it and some people don't. You need to ascertain if they have the skill. But also, it was an attempt not to go too far in terms of how much skill you need. Like you're really trying to look for the aptitude for programming and not necessarily a list of facts that somebody might have learned. And one thing, for example, yesterday I saw on Facebook, a friend of mine saying, "Hey, my company is hiring. If you know React, could you please call me? We're looking to hire a React programmer." I thought that was a good example because I was not a React programmer 4 weeks ago, and I just spent 4 weeks messing around with React, and now I am a React programmer, and that it was no big deal to learn React because I'm a programmer, and I kind of know how to learn things and how to do things. And so if I had applied for that job 4 weeks ago, I would not have gotten it, even though it really only takes about 4 weeks to learn React. So there's a lot of people out there that are looking for programmers that have, that certain type of knowledge. Similarly, you may find a programmer who has been working in, I don't want to insult anybody, but a programmer who's been doing like PHP and WordPress for 10 years or 15 years. And they never learned computer science, and they're very confused about the difference between if, else if, and just if, and and they don't really like whatever it is. That's all. Like they never learned that programming stuff, but they've been doing WordPress for 15 years. So they're going to be great at WordPress, but they're never going to learn React without a lot of kind of coaching, and it's going to be sort of hard to get them that programming skill. And so the idea of the guerrilla guide for interviewing is like, let's focus on the aptitude of what makes you be a good programmer for a whole career. Now, that said, it's easy to use it in a wrong way. And it's easy to use it as an exclusionary technique. So one thing that was different when I wrote that guide 20 years ago is there weren't that many programming jobs 20 years ago relative to today. And there were usually enough people applying for them. And so the problem that you face as an interviewer is I don't want to accidentally hire somebody that can't do this job. And the way the world has changed in the last 20 years is now we're in a situation of I don't want to accidentally discard somebody who really could do the job, but just doesn't seem like the ideal candidate at first. And so today, I think we're much more in a position of having to take a much wider and more diverse pool of candidates and identify the ones that are going to be able to be trained up and be able to do this job ultimately and eventually, and find the good ones and maybe the diamond in the rough. Whereas at the time I wrote the article, the attitude was like, don't worry, don't take a risk on this person. If there's any risk that they can't do it, just move on to the next person. And you can't do that part anymore.
And you can find a bunch of useless facts on Stack Overflow. You don't have to learn it all.
Yeah, actually,
maybe. I'm actually, with all due respect to Stack Overflow, my experience is you get 20% of the time you get something that's just out of date, just wrong. Now we're going to work on that. We're fixing that. But there is a pretty strong risk that if you don't use your head and you do use Stack Overflow, you're going to run into some trouble. Not a lot of trouble, but some.
Yeah, actually, I have a follow-up question to this interviewing thing. It seems like in the past 20 years, there's been created a new sort of stratum of programmers in managed languages, like people who never touched any unprotected memory, for example. So do you think there is a big difference in how you interview for like this kind of positions versus like more universal or more I don't know, hardcore positions or whatever you call them?
Well, one thing I've noticed, you're absolutely right. And I wrote an article, I think it was called Back to Basics. I think that's the one on Joel Software, which you can read if you're interested in this. And we've gone through sort of several layers from the original assembler only programmers to high-level programming languages, Fortran and COBOL, eventually C. C had the pointers and you had to manage your own memory. Around the time that Java was invented, so that would be 1995, and .NET, that would be 2000, we started seeing actually managed languages that manage memory for you, and you never had to think about allocation. These were invented with garbage collection and Lisp in 1959 or something, but they became very, very popular 10 or 15 years ago. And today it's kind of unheard of to manage your own memory unless you're really, on embedded systems or chip. I think embedded systems and hardware, you still have to manage your own memory, but it's kind of unheard of. And one thing that you always feel is like, hey, the programmers that have to manage their own memory, those are the tough guys. They're like hardcore and they get greasy and they can do anything, and everybody should be a tough guy. And these kids today, they're wimps. They never had to deal with this particular stuff. That's not really the right. It's not really the right criteria for what makes you a tough programmer versus a not so tough programmer. And the answer is, like, as we have built new languages that have gotten to higher and higher levels of abstraction, sometimes the abstractions leak, and sometimes actually they don't really leak. So when you have a leaky abstraction, you really do have to understand what's happening at a lower level below you. Otherwise, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. When the abstraction does not leak, it's okay just to use the abstraction. And so examples of non-leaky abstractions are memory managed programming languages. That's sort of one example where, it really is okay just to let the compiler figure out when I need that memory again. That's actually fine. Like, do not waste any brain cells on that particular thing. Use them for something at a higher level. So I think, similarly to, when we jump from machine language to assembly language, I'm sure there were a lot of people saying, oh, you kids don't even memorize the 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, whatever that means. And, and similarly, there was kind of a tendency to say when we moved to managed languages, wow, you kids have never allocated memory. But really, allocating your memory for you is one of those things you actually don't have to know how it works. It's okay if you trust it to, just work. And I think there will be other abstractions like this in the future, where it's kind of okay that we're sort of moving ahead. And it's fun to learn that stuff just to see how it works and to get an idea for the performance characteristics of certain things. But there's definitely going to be stuff that comes in the future where you don't really have to think. I think that we're going to move to an era of cloud computing where, like, nobody's ever going to really think about how S3 stores files. They're just going to think, I don't know, I give up. Or what's going on inside the JPEG file format, don't care. Or, what's really in a DOM of a web browser. It's like, I don't know, looks okay. Or even CSS, we may not have to know that because everything just looks okay. We use Bootstrap, it's fine.
Yeah, well, I guess very many people will disagree on the memory management is an abstraction that never leaks, because if you really want throughput on your server or really good latency and you're running anything managed, you have to know that stuff. But
yeah,
I understand.
There's going to be a specialist that has to learn like sort of a specialist field. And another thing that I think is really important is where I think the real hard work is not necessarily in managing your memory. If you're building a user interface, for example, there's little details of, okay, I just made a pop-up. When you click on this thing pops up and it's in a web browser. And now it's got an OK button, but what if you click over here? What if the user clicks over here? That should make that thing go away, right? That's a decision that you have to make. Making that decision is just where client-side programmers pull out their hair all day long. I don't have any hair to pull because they spend 2 hours saying, I can't make the thing. And that's just as challenging as there's a memory leak and I haven't found it. And it's just as relevant. And that's maybe where you should be spending your brain cells, is making things a little bit better for people. For things that have to be highly performant, great. You may want to use managed memory. I actually kind of think that it's gotten to the point where a good memory manager is actually like memory management code is likely to be in a better position than you are to decide how to manage memory. It probably has more information and can do smarter things than you can do by doing it manually.
Yeah, and also follow up. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I want to ask, you use JavaScript on top of your hash platform, right? So what's about performance? What's about all these wares? Is it okay? Do you like JavaScript at all?
JavaScript's gotten pretty fast and I like it. Hash also uses a lot of Rust for the things that need to be highly performant. So it's actually kind of a cross between Rust and JavaScript. Most of the Rust is internal and the JavaScript is what you have to use as a user.
Okay, so the question from our Telegram chat. Marina Dubovets asks, many years ago, you described Dream Office. How to improve a home office experience? What is their dream home office for you, Joel?
Yeah, well, I've had to set up a couple in the last few months. And for me, it's about having a quiet place to work where you won't be interrupted. So your own room, not just sitting in the dining room table with the family around you. A really good chair that I discovered is not negotiable. And what I found is the average chair is uncomfortable after 2 hours, and a really good chair is comfortable for 8 hours. And the good ones can be kind of expensive, but it's good cost. And a big monitor, at least 30 inches, maybe 2, the usual programming situation. And then you're probably okay if you have all that stuff, depending on what else you need to do. High-speed internet connection. It's sort of surprising how much better Wi-Fi routers have gotten in the last 5 years. I just recently threw out a whole bunch of 5-year-old routers and put in brand new routers and could not believe how much better my experience was, which I thought the bottleneck was downstream, but actually, you can take, if you don't have a modern Wi-Fi router, go ahead and get one and you'll be happy.
Thank you.
Audio. Oh, let's talk about, we could talk about remote connections. I don't know how good I sound right now, but I always use a speakerphone, this little Jabra one that has a mic array, and the audio quality is extremely high for the people on the other side. Oh, cool. We at Stack Overflow, we were all remote from the beginning, and we would buy people $300 gamer headsets. And we just really wanted that sort of high quality experience. The people that are just using the little mic that's built into their laptop and the little speakers that are built into their laptop, it's going half duplex. So when you're speaking, it cuts you off, it cuts off the other person. When they're speaking, it cuts you off, and that drives you crazy.
Alex Live, probably this is time for you to ask something.
Right. So you mentioned a bunch of technologies, Joel, here. So first you mentioned WordPress, right, as something that is not a sign of a good professional experience, maybe. And you're kind of like, I somewhat agree with that, right? Maybe this is no offense to WordPress developers or anyone, right?
No,
but
WordPress allowed millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people to build websites that had no programming training. And unfortunately, WordPress at some point could only do so much out of the box. And then it just said, go use PHP. And those people said, sure, okay. And that was their first experience with programming. And so there's sort of a lot of, let's just say, not people whose job is not to be a programmer, who have built large things on top of WordPress that are running some of the biggest websites around today. And it's great that WordPress has enabled them to build it. That's right. Kind of a good thing.
So it's a leaky abstraction, right? So like at some point you have to go out of the box and you enter the world of PHP. And then the second technology that you mentioned was Rust. And from your, like, I got mixed feelings because first you said that you don't need to manage your memory manually, right? As a general population developer, right? So it sounded like you're not a strong believer that Rust will be next Java, right, so to speak, or something that is next JavaScript, something that's the whole world uses.
The thing that
but then you are
actually
using, you're using that yourself at HashEye, right? So how do you balance this?
Well, I would say that, we've always had this concept of systems programming and applications programming. And applications programming is, I want to make a website for my soccer club where people can sign up to play soccer games. And systems programming is I want to make an operating system, or I want to make a content management system, or I want to make a blogging platform. And the thing about systems programming is that it's going to be used by so many people if you've done it right. Certain things like performance and stability are much more important than they are in application programming. In application programming, I just want to build something quickly for my soccer team. In systems programming, it's worth it to me to spend another 6 months with 12 programmers making something 5% faster because the world will be a better place because so many people are going to use it. So there have always been systems languages and applications languages. And in fact, Java was always designed to be an application language. And C was the ultimate systems language, and then C++ was sort of the follow-up to that. And it's very hard even today to imagine using application languages to write systems. So for example, Dino, which is the follow-up to Node, is not written in JavaScript, even though its whole purpose is to run JavaScript. It's probably got some parts in JavaScript, but there are large parts of it that will not be, because you want to use a systems programming language for the stuff in the inner loop that has to be really fast and that lots and lots of people are going to depend on. The other thing I'm really excited about Rust for, personally, I've been doing a lot of Arduino and embedded systems programming, which I think is really cool. The idea, you have a little chip, it costs $2, it runs code, it's really robust, doesn't have an operating system, and I don't want it to ever have an operating system because the same reason I don't want to run servers for my websites anymore. Everybody's going to serverless. Like, I don't want to wait for the thing to boot up. I don't want to be constantly upgrading some daemon that I didn't even know was running. I don't want to log on there with a SSH and be trying to find, it doesn't have Emacs, I have to use Vim. I don't even want to know about that kind of stuff when I'm talking about a $2 chip that's running some LEDs in my house. I just want to be able to have it. The minute you apply power to the pins, your code is running. That second, it's not booting. There's no shell. There's no daemons. There's no exinitd. There's no cron tabs and none of that stuff. And I think that's a really kind of cool world. And these $2 chips now, like the ESP32 is a good example. They've gotten unbelievably powerful, where you have kind of as much power as maybe an original IBM PC or something. And that seems like a great place to use Rust. And it's kind of early days for that. That all started with C. Arduino code is C, essentially, or C++. And that is fine, but it's sort of too hard and you get into crashes and difficulty and problems. And it's not a very powerful programming language. There's been an attempt to do a lot of Python with CircuitPython to run Python on those little things. My experience is that Python takes up too much memory and slows you down too much. Right now, it might get better. But it seems like Rust would be a fantastic application for embedded systems.
Right. So Rust is incidentally the most loved programming language in the most recent Stack Overflow developer survey. Right. And
cool.
Just since we mentioned the survey, can you guess the most dreaded platform?
The most dreaded platform?
Application platform. Yeah.
Oh,
the worst.
Java.
Absolutely the worst. No.
Angular?
WordPress. No, Java is somewhere in between, right? Somewhere is in the middle. Everyone uses it. Everyone loves it. Some people are sometimes hating it because they have to use it, but it's absolutely glorious. Right. So, since we talk about these, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you have to say is that when any system becomes old enough, it becomes 10 or 20 years old. Eventually, somebody comes up with the new system, a competitor. So you're, like WordPress might be an example. Somebody comes up with a new system that's a competitor, and it doesn't do any of the things that the old system did, but it does all the things that it does do in a much more modern way. And so it's easy and simple and fast, and everybody loves it, but it doesn't have all the power of the old system. And then the old system says, wait a minute, we got to copy all that stuff from the new system. And so they copy all the ideas from the new system into the old system, and now the old system has two personalities. And I think WordPress is now on 3 personalities, if I'm not mistaken, where kind of the way that you do things, you sort of have the original way of doing it, which is supported for backwards compatibility. And then you had the one that we were using from 2012 to maybe 2018. And now we're building everything in this brave new world. And to a newcomer that comes to one of these systems that's been around for 20 years, they look at it and they're like, what's this and why is that? And it's in 2 places and I don't know what to do. And you have to learn all the old ways of doing it. A good example for that everybody knows probably is JavaScript with the promises and the await and the callbacks and the async. And there's been 3 different versions of how you do, not threading really, but 3 different ways of how you do concurrency and JavaScript. And, everybody just changed their mind, and all 3 ways still work. Or importing modules, the way you do modules in JavaScript, they changed their mind. And so for a new programmer, you have no choice but to just not understand it. And when you start, you're going to have to learn all 3 different ways because different people are using different ways, and it's a mess and it's ugly. And so that's sort of what happens with old systems. And WordPress is the ultimate old system where, it's just complicated. It
is. Somewhat like Java because of the design practices where they let other languages figure out the path forward, and then the development team kind of tries to specify and take the kind of battle-tested approach. So, but coming back to the Stack Overflow survey, this is my personal question, I think, because you've been so involved with the community, so you understand how it works. Do you think the survey actually predicts something? Is it representative? Can I look at that and draw some conclusions, being oh, Rust is so universally loved, I need to bet all in on learning Rust, or I need to hire Rust developers now, so I have the immense power over the community? Or do you think it's just Is it maybe just not that powerful, the survey and the community? What would you say?
It's definitely super representative. The survey has something like 100,000 people filling it out every year, and then we sort of have to close it because we don't want to continue to gather data beyond that. And there's nothing else out there that has that much depth in terms of really surveying what developers use. And we also sort of have deeper data that you can look at from actual Stack Overflow usage, and that's really not just a survey of what people love, but you can actually see what people are using based on the preponderance of tags on Stack Overflow. And that's, every single programmer at some point is going, if you're programming in Rust, you're going to land on some Rust questions on Stack Overflow, and so the actual usage of Stack Overflow, I think, is sort of undeniably reflecting what developers are using. That said, there's always been an idea of like what's trendy and what's cool and what are the cool kids doing, and I want to, I love what the cool kids are doing, or I hate what the cool kids are doing, and there's some of that, and there's certainly been something that we saw with the JavaScript frameworks, where they sort of came and went. And there was jQuery, and jQuery, now everybody's like, yay, we have abolished jQuery, but 10 years ago everybody was saying jQuery was the best thing ever, and then there was I guess nowadays it's Angular came and went even faster, and so now we're in React. And it's sort of humorous to say, no, React, that's it. That's the be all and end all. React will just be the only programming environment ever. We figured it out. So there will surely be something else that comes along, because that's just sort of the way of the world. But I don't think it matters, because if you're talking about what to learn, learn what's fun and learn what you want to use and what you enjoy using, and then go pick a job that lets you use the stuff that you want to use. And if you think about who to hire, the idea of hiring a Rust programmer or somebody that knows how to do what you're doing right now is nuts, because 6 months from now, you're all going to change your mind and you're going to throw it all away and have to use a different language. So hire the people that can learn Rust in 6 weeks, and the people that can learn a framework like React in 4 weeks, and the people that are going to sort of rapidly adapt, and the people that really remember the core computer science concepts, and not afraid to understand functional programming styles, or whatever it may be.
Okay.
Interesting.
Speaking. Oleg?
Go ahead, Oleg. No, you first.
Speaking of a mindset, I remember your article about telling that all SVN users are brain damaged. Did humanity solve the problem with source control and maybe languages? Should we still learn Mercurial or all these things, and maybe Git? Do all Git and Mercurial users are brain damaged in a slightly new way?
I think that what happened is that so Mercurial was a nice idea, but it did not win, really. I think Git really won. We bet a lot. We made a product called Kiln that was a real big bet on Mercurial, and that product failed not in the least because Mercurial really wasn't the way to go. It turns out that Git was much more popular. I think that what happened is that the front end tools that we got for Git just got much better, and so for the most part, the programmers were able to sort of figure out Git. That said, it's still pretty complicated, and when you get into trouble, you may not understand what you've done or what exactly is going on in your repository. So it's a shame that there isn't an easier system. I mean, one of the ideas of Glitch was to say that 99% of what programmers that aren't on a big team, if you're on a big team, you have to use something like Git, and you might as well go ahead and use Git. If you're on a team of 1 or 2 or 3 people, the 2 things that you want from version control is the ability to go backwards if you make a mistake, and the ability to coordinate with maybe 1 or 2 other people. And in a lot of those cases, Git may be overpowered. So our idea with Glitch is to say, in those circumstances, maybe we should just use a Google Docs type system where everybody's editing the same file, and anybody that opens that file in their editor is seeing it, and they're seeing your changes as you're making those changes. So think of it like a Google document or a Google Sheets. It's all kind of live. And so that way you get the ability to work with 1 or 2 other people, and you also still have the ability to go backwards in time. And that's what we built in Glitch. And I think that actually covers a lot of the simple programming in the world, not the systems programming, not a big company making something, but just 1 or 2 people that are working on a simple website. And Glitch, by the way, uses Git on the back end. So as soon as it's not powerful enough, then you just start using Git.
But what do you think? Is Git so difficult because it's too low level, or because it's too smart and you can figure out when it's smart?
I think the trouble with Git is that it requires some abstract thinking at multiple different levels at once. I don't really know how to describe this, but it's just like the concepts are just like a little bit too complicated to really understand what it's doing and how it works, and what that means. And part of it is sort of an attempt to give you a lot of power, which is great. But there are certain things that pointers were this way. Pointers this way. And actually, in modern programming, I think functions is first-class objects. The fact that in a modern programming language, a function is first class. That's wonderful when you understand it, but it takes people a really, really long time to learn that. And that's just one of those things that I think is just harder to learn than some other things. I can teach people what a variable is and how a variable is like a little box that stores a number. But then if you try to teach them that it can also hold a function with a closure, maybe, so the function somehow inherits some knowledge from outside of its mailbox, it's too common. Like you could tell, whoops, just like a learning curve just went way up. That just became a lot harder. And it's great for professional programmers. We'll figure it out and we'll be able to use that. And it's very powerful. And I would never want to use a programming language without first-class functions. And I would never want to use a version control system, pick which things to stage, and and it didn't merge as reliably. But I also recognize that those are very, very hard concepts that take a lot of dedication to really learn. And an important thing to remember about programming is, there's maybe 2 or 3 million of us in the world that are programmers, and it's our job. But there's probably maybe more than that. But there might be 10 million people who think it's their job. There's 2 million of that would really understand this conversation. And then there's 40 or 50 million people in the world who go to Stack Overflow every month with a programming problem. And so who are all those other people? And those are people that are being forced to write code for some reason. And it's not their job. And they're just not that good at it. And they maybe don't have the training in it. And they just don't have the experience in it. So it's always important to try to remember, what are we going to do for all the people that have to program? And just to recognize that they're not all, maybe they're not as smart as us, or maybe they are, but they just don't care. They're trying to make a blog and they're doing some PHP. And they're not going to ever understand functional programming or callbacks or something like that, or Git. Then they may never understand it.
Right. So a quick follow-up question about Git. Sorry, it's just very timely, right? Yeah. So Git is very smart, right? So I want your personal solution. So when you mess up the repository because you said you're still programming, right? So when you mess up your repository that you don't know what to do, what's your preferred solution? Do you actually go to Stack Overflow and figure out how the interactive rebase works, or do you do a clean checkout?
I have not worked on a project with other people for a while, so I would just if I was working on a project with other people, I would go find somebody who's smarter than me and say, you have to come sit down at my desk and fix what I've done and then come get me.
So no, but the underlying question, would you solve the problem in an easy way, right? Like a fresh checkout, you apply your changes on top and done, right? So you're moving forward with this, or would you learn the intricacies of this Git graph and try to figure out, spend time on that?
Is it before 4 o'clock in the afternoon or after 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'll go ahead, I'll learn the thing. It's fine. If it's after 4 o'clock, I think I'll probably just try to fake it. My personal, I think the question you're asking is, personally, I program for fun. And so personally, if I hit a problem, I want to stop and learn about that. If I hit something that I don't understand or I don't know how to do it, I think this is a great opportunity to go take some time and learn how to do that thing, no matter how hard it is, and then I will have learned something. And that's sort of my approach as big head programmer. But sometimes you just want to go to sleep and you just need to finish this thing because you've got all the whatever, and you solve it, as I say, with hammers and anger.
Yeah, those whatever things are called deadlines, Joel. For mortal people, there are deadlines on things. Excellent. Right. Can you maybe say a couple of words about glitch in general for people who are maybe not aware of that? Because you mentioned that, and then how do you describe it and what it does?
Yeah.
Because I think it's very interesting.
The idea of glitch is to try to make a programming environment for people that just need quick code and don't want to be bogged down in all the stuff that professional coders use all day long. And so when you go to glitch, you click one link and you're in an IDE, and so you've got files on the left-hand side and code on the right-hand side, and it's just regular code. You've got JavaScript, you've got HTML, you've got CSS, everything you're used to, any kind of environment that you want to use, anything you're kind of used to using in terms of the JavaScript ecosystem is there for you, and the code is just regular code. So we don't change anything about the lines of code that you write, which means that when you hit a problem, if you find some sample code on Stack Overflow, just go ahead and cut and paste it. It's going to work. We're not trying to make a new coding environment. But the magic is that there is a website now running already for you on the cloud, and you can call your friend and say, go to this URL, and it's already there. And any changes you make to that HTML, there's no save button, there's no check-in button. You didn't have to set up Git, you didn't have to create a domain, you didn't have to do anything. It's just already there, and they will instantly see it on their browser. So literally, as I'm typing code, those changes are already appearing on every browser that's hitting this page. And the magic of it then is if I want somebody to help me, I can just give them another URL, and they log in and they see the same IDE that I'm seeing. So they see the same files, and they can edit the code and I can edit the code, and it's all sort of changing the same underlying files without the complication of version control and without any kind of setup. So what it's meant for is these very simple little things where you just want to demo some code, you want to try something out, you want to make a little simple, fast application to, just a piece of, we used to call it throwaway code. It just eliminates all the complication. If you've ever been in a situation where you're just trying to learn how to do something real quick, you don't want to do it in your main coding environment because that would make a mess. You just want to sort of experiment with something on the side. Glitch is a great way to do that. So it's sort of designed for all the easy programming tasks, and it just eliminates all the complicated stuff that you might have to figure out.
So can we say that glitch is about breaking barriers?
Yeah, I mean, there's always been, there's always been sort of system and application programming, and then there's sort of like we made it easier for you. The last great advance, the last thing that I think was like glitch was Visual Basic, which Microsoft released in 1990, I would say. One thing that happened when Macintosh and Windows came out, before that we had C programming and it was all command line. And then when Macintosh and Windows came out, you had to program for the graphical user interface. And it was 1,000,000 times more complicated. And a Hello World app in C for Windows was several files of pages and pages of code. And it didn't even say hello world when all that was done. And you had to learn about fonts and menus and icons and da-da-da-da. And it was just really, really, really hard to write GUI programs for Windows in languages like C. When Visual Basic came out, it once again took the Hello World app down to one line and made it so that you can write hello world in one line. And then when you're building maybe at the same speed and at the same level as you were with C on Unix, only now you're doing it with Visual Basic on Windows, and you're getting a GUI app when you're done. So that was sort of the magic of Visual Basic, was simplifying a lot of stuff. It simplified memory management, it simplified the event loop, it simplified how you interact with graphical user elements. If you wanted a button, instead of just defining the position by typing X and Y coordinates, you just drag the button onto the screen, boop, and you just dropped it there and you adjusted it. And when it looked like you wanted to look, you were done. Before that, you literally had to know the position in X and Y coordinates that you wanted your button to be at. And so it did that simplification where it made it easy again to do GUI programming, and it enabled a ton of people for a really, really long time, really, I think until Java started coming out. Visual Basic was the language that people inside corporations wanted to use when they had to build simple little internal apps that had to look pretty good and they had to run on Windows. I think Glitch is going to try to go for that same niche. Like there's still an interesting market for people that just don't want to learn the complication of what it takes to build modern web apps. And that stuff has gotten really, really hard for non-professional programmers.
Andrei?
Well, a follow-up to this, yeah. So looks like Glitch is in the same niche as Visual Basic in the sense that you're still writing code. So you're getting some nice GUI, but you're writing code. But there are attempts, and some of them reasonably successful, of like no-code systems. So do you think it's achievable at all for like a large class of applications?
No.
I know the answer. I wanted you to explain why you.
Not a believer. I'm not a big believer in that. There's a version of
why
no-code,
so?
There's a version of no code, which is like what I call like Microsoft Access. So those of you that have been around for a while remember Microsoft Access, and the new version is called Airtable, and it's not Microsoft. And there's always going to be a version of this, which is like, well, most people are just making CRUD apps and they're like databases. So we'll just give them some beautiful, like make a database kind of thing. And here's the trouble. The trouble is that no code isn't really no code. It does the code, it's just maybe it has a GUI for configuring the code instead of some text files. And the GUI is still a language, and you still have to find the things in the GUI and configure them. And that means you still have to think like a programmer. Only now you're thinking like a programmer, which means you've been trained as a programmer, but we're not going to let you have the best tool we figured out for expressing algorithms, which is text in an editor. We're going to give you the second best way for expressing algorithms, which is a squirrely user interface with menus and drop downs and all kinds of things. You got to remember where they are and go find them. And now there's no way to really, communicate. So the value to expressing algorithms and expressing code, the best way we figured out to do that, honestly, is just text files. The big innovation, I think, since 1950 for text files is nobody seems to argue about tabs and spaces anymore. No, actually, I had an argument about that 2 years ago. Unicode. You can put Unicode in your text files. That's a big innovation. You can use emoji in your variable names. But other than that, like that's the best way we found to express these things. And with the no-code environment, sort of start out saying, oh, why should you write any of that stuff? We'll do it all for you. And then people said, yeah, but I want to change that thing here. And I do need to express an algorithm at some point. And so we're like, all right, we'll give you some kind of graphical user interface or some easy thing where you don't have to type code. But nevertheless, you're still trying to express an algorithm. And that's where it all goes haywire. That has never worked.
So I can see some trends. So for example, Trello probably is easier than Jira, for example. They probably the most famous competitor for it, probably. To start coding without IDE is easier than start coding with IDE because you have to install it, to download it, that's it, etc., etc. To have some, worldwide community for programmers like Stack Overflow is, better than don't have it. So it's easier and easier and easier for programmers to be involved, to start with something, etc., etc. Can we say that Joel Spolsky is a person who simplify programmers' lives?
I don't want to take any credit for that. I think of the things that you mentioned, I think Stack Overflow is one thing that has allowed programmers to use a much wider variety of tools and libraries and technologies than they could have used before. I just built a simple little CRUD website, and in case somebody else has to maintain it, I made a list of all the technologies I use. It's like JavaScript and React and Node, and like every single Node module that I installed, and I'm using Google to do login and OAuth 2, and just sort of made a list of all those things. And I was sort of surprised in 4 weeks I ended up using 20 different like little libraries or tools all of which I had to learn and all of which I didn't know before I started. And in a world without Stack Overflow, I wouldn't be able to learn all those things as quickly and solve all the problems that I had as quickly. It would have been just much, much, much harder to just keep picking up a new tool. And the world before Stack Overflow was really a world where, let's say you're doing Windows programming, you would go buy this book by Charles Petzold, and it was like this thick, and you read the whole book, and now you knew Windows programming. And if you ever ran into trouble, sorry, I don't know, go to the bookstore, maybe there's a second edition. But that you really just sort of learn all that stuff, and you just said, that's kind of all I can do. And to learn another programming library or something, you'd go get another book. And the ability really to draw upon other people for help means that you can just sort of pull in all these little libraries and node modules and bits and pieces and use them quickly and get help with them without really learning them. You never really have to learn CSS. You can just sort of start with Bootstrap. But Bootstrap is sort of hard if you don't really understand CSS. So just go ahead and just include this thing and then follow these simple instructions. And when you run into trouble, you gotta go look on Stack Overflow because you don't know what's going on under the scenes. You just don't understand how Bootstrap is working. So somebody else is gonna have to help you. But that's okay. That sort of elevates everybody's power as programmers and makes them much more efficient in this world where we're using lots of code. And I don't want to take any credit for that. I mean, that's entirely due to the millions of people that have answered questions on Stack Overflow. That's where all the credit is due, really. We have almost 100,000 people every month who write an answer on Stack Overflow. And that's really incredible. And that's really the source of all the power for programmers today. And that's really how we sort of leveled up, and we're able to use much fancier stuff than we were able to use. Certain tools, like a typical programmer these days is just, they might be writing some JavaScript and using Amazon Web Services or some kind of cloud computing for everything. And they're using 14 different Amazon things. And they never could have done that if they had to go to the bookstore and buy a book and read the whole book in order to use any one of those.
Creating software is as we know, is a very difficult and complicated thing. And building communities is very difficult and complicated thing too. Which is easier for you?
It sort of depends. I mean, building communities, it takes a lot of knowledge of anthropology and how people work, and an observation of what does and doesn't work, and where things are going. I think that is fairly tricky, and I think a lot of people have sort of tried and failed, and they've built systems that appear to be very successful communities, like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, the so-called social networks, which appear to have been very successful, but also have really hurt the world in many ways. Maybe they've helped the world too, but kind of like nobody really knows the answer to what you do about Twitter, how to make it a safe place where people are nice to each other. That is, I think, probably a much harder problem than just like, can I make some code work? Eventually, you're going to get the code to work. You're going to be able to make the software work, but it remains to be seen if human beings are ever going to be entitled to write comments. I believe that the human race has lost its privileges for writing comments. By comments, I mean on a blog post and there's comments at the bottom, or on the Facebook page or on Twitter, and I'm commenting on something that somebody else did. I'm pretty sure right now that is not a privilege that humans should have, because they have kind of proven that they are not able to do that in a way which is good for the human race.
But what's the difference between a like an online community like this and a like a real life community? Why can't we make a real life community nice? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, well, the first question is if you're in person or not in person, and I think all of us know. And I think at this point, this is the problem with humans, is that at this point, I think every single human being who can read and write and has a smartphone understands that when you're typing or when you're online, that people tend to be much more rude than they would be in real life, and they say things that maybe they think, but they would never say to a person in real life, and therefore the quality of discourse becomes very aggressive online. or very antagonistic very quickly relative to what would happen in real life when you're actually looking at a person in even on video chat, but certainly in person. And the funny thing is that everybody knows this, and yet nobody takes it into account. And so when they see somebody apparently being rude online, rather than saying, oh, that's just a symptom, which I understand, of online software, that makes you appear to be rude, they nevertheless assume the worst, and then they sort of jump back in and make a flame war. And I sort of thought when everybody in the world learned this, they would stop making flame wars, and apparently they haven't. So I despair of anybody coming up with a solution to that problem. The way we solved it on Stack Overflow, and we did not solve it, but we made it a lot better, is very strict adherence to the requirement to stay on topic. And that means you're allowed to ask a question. I mean, Stack Overflow is not a discussion forum. It is not a free speech zone. It is a place where you ask a programming question and then you write an answer to that question. You propose an answer to that question. And that's the only thing you're really allowed to do there. And that means that when somebody goes into free speech mode, we can censor them. We just delete their things. And that actually makes it, I think, a more successful online community than an online community that has the much harder problem of needing to enable free speech. So that's sort of a cop-out, right? Like we're like, I don't know what to do if I was Twitter and I wanted to allow free speech and I had to decide whether you have the right to lie about things or whether you have a right to your racist speech. And maybe you're allowed to racist speech if you're the president of the United States, but everybody else has to not do it. Or, you know, those are really tricky problems, and I'm glad I don't have to face them because, you know, we limited our discourse to conversation about programming questions and answers.
Yeah, but did I understand you correctly that you think that everybody understands that they're more aggressive or more rude while online when in real life?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they've figured that out by now. I think they understand now that people will say things in a text message that they wouldn't say to your face. I think if you interview people, you would find that most people have figured that out, but they don't behave as if that were true. They still feed the trolls and they get into troll wars online, and they see something on Facebook that was obviously put there by a political operative, and then they believe that that's a real person and that they need to now debate with that person. And they just say, and they just sort of hammer away at Reddit and whatever, creating like a really, really awful online discourse that's bad for the planet, bad for the world, and bad for their mental health. And they should know better by now, but somehow the way that people behave is not reflecting on that. They still, I think everybody understands that, you know, the way that online media and social networks work is by showing you things that you're likely to be interested in. And they define interest as, did you click on it? And did you click on it? The best way to get you to click on something is to make you outraged. And the best way to make you outraged is with certain types of content that's like, did you hear about this horrifying thing that happened? And people are like, no, I did not. And that is horrifying. And I'm going to click on that. And so the platform feeds them more and more of that. And I think they understand that that's happening and that that doesn't reflect the real world, and that they're being fed a diet of garbage that's making the world worse. And even though they understand it, they continue to participate in that system because they just don't, I don't know what to say. I try not to.
Okay, you're of a very high opinion about how much people understand about themselves, but yeah, that's your opinion.
Maybe they're just sheep in the system, in a crappy system, not of their own devising. But either way, the effect is the same, is that I think they have lost their commenting privileges until you notify me otherwise. If you want free speech, go build a website. That was something that Dave Weiner was saying in like 1998, 1999. Dave Weiner of scripting.com, who's an old school programmer that invented podcasts and RSS and a lot of useful stuff. And he just said, I don't want comments on my blog. If you want to say something, go make your own blog, make your own space, and then get people to follow it and say whatever you want. But I don't, I worked really hard writing an article on my blog. I set up a server. I coded it in my case, and I wrote something, and then people think I have something to say, and so they read it and they follow it and they share it with their friends. And you don't have a right just to kind of free surf on all that work that I did with your bad idea just typing some garbage on the bottom of my blog just because I made an edit box there for you to type garbage into. You're not entitled to that, right? And I always thought that. We never had comments on Joel on software because I really did believe that, is that you would just get dumb people that don't know anything, and you would get a little bit of sort of useful something, but mostly you got the free riders. And it's like, fine, you want free speech, go do the work, and then get people to follow you, and then they'll listen to you.
Joel, so if my understanding is my understanding correct that you write the Joel software blog from scratch, not using some engine, correct?
So the first version of it was in CityDesk, which was our own product. Boy, that was a failed product. It was funny. CityDesk was Windows-based content management system. So in the days before, this is 2000. So in those days, you couldn't even write a text editor that was very good in a browser. Like, I think when I started Joel on software, the best you could do in HTML is you could make a text area, but if the user closed the browser while they were editing, like the entire contents would just be gone. So at the time, I thought, stupidly and wrongly, that the web would never get better, and that the right solution was to create a Windows app that was like a word processor that you could use to create content for the web. It wasn't the worst idea in the world. There were a lot of products, Microsoft Front Page. There were a lot of successful products, Dreamweaver, that were designed for content for the web using Windows. So that was what Joel on software was on CityDesk for the longest time. But it just got worse and worse and harder to sustain and to keep working. And eventually, the nice people at WordPress, who I love, just volunteered to port Joel on software to WordPress and host it and support it. And that's very nice. And now it's WordPress. And I have no idea how it works, but I can still post things if I need to.
Tell me honestly, what was more interesting for you? To write some posts, some blogs, or to get a platform for it?
Or to get the what?
To code a platform, to code tools for it too. So what was more interesting?
They're sort of interesting at different levels. I mean, I like them both. I really like coding because it's like a little puzzle. You get a little puzzle every day presented to you, and then you solve it, and then you get another little puzzle, and then you solve it, and then you're delighted when you solve it and you fixed it, and you can see that you fixed it, and it's just a real sense of accomplishment, the coding, and I really enjoy that. But blogging was fun too. That was sort of, you write a document, you write a blog post, and I did a lot of editing on those blog posts, and went over them many, many times in my head and read them 10 times over, adjusting things and tweaking things, and then you release it. And you just hope that nobody misunderstands it. And you get, some email from some nice people saying, "Hey, this is awesome. This really helped me." And that's very nice too.
Good. And we have like only the last minute probably, and I have the last question for tonight for broadcast. Joel, what is the picture behind you?
Oh, yeah, that's a painting from an Italian painter named Michele del Campo, and it's. I was told it was from Barcelona. You have to move out over here.
Good. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It's in Barcelona. It's just 3 youth in Barcelona, and it's just one of my favorite painters. Is an Italian, Michele del Campo.
Okay. Thank you very much. And all there, our watchers, viewers, attendees are welcome to the Zoom discussion zone. So the link is in your chart and under the web player on livejocro.org. Joel, thank you very, 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 very much. That was very interesting for all of us.
Thank you.
You're really a person who makes our lives better. But thank you very much for it.
Thank you. Well, you're too kind, and thank you for stoking my ego. I don't need it, but it's very much appreciated.
We try to
thanks for all your patience.
We try to do our best in terms to make your ego strong. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.